Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here today to deliver this KYB Masterclass as a part of CAF's Great Identity Debate event. There's been some fantastic panels and masterclasses delivered so far. I'd encourage everyone here to check them out if you haven't already. And I hope this talk on the ever-important topic of navigating KYB challenges and trends is to the same standard as that my colleagues have been producing so far. By way of introduction, I am Owen Thomas. I am the KYB product lead here at CAF. I have over 15 years experience in working with business data. Throughout my career, I've worked in B2B credit reports, data orchestration, dabbled with ID verification, and I've just celebrated my 1 year anniversary at CAF, where we're building out our global KYB offering. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. So for anyone who's just stumbled across this, we'll quickly run through an introduction to what KYB is, okay? We'll delve into the myriad regulations impacting businesses today. We'll run through where the major issues are for companies, looking to adhere to regulations, highlight some of the trends that are starting to emerge, and finally bring all of that together with some tips on how to streamline the KYB process as much as possible and be as efficient as you can be going forward. Okay, introductions. So what is KYB? KYB, or Know Your Business, is a due diligence process that financial institutions, banks, and other organizations use to verify the identity and assess the risk associated with their business clients. So in the same manner that these types of businesses have to verify the identity of the people they deal with, your traditional KYC or Know Your Customer, they also have to verify the legitimacy of any businesses they deal with and the people behind them. So KYB followed with KYC. The KYB process typically involves verifying the name, the address, the registration details, and some other data points, whilst also collecting and verifying information about a business's legal structure, ownership, financial stability, and other relevant details. Its importance comes from the fact that it helps institutions comply with regulatory requirements, prevent fraud, and manage risks associated with their business relationships. From a regulatory viewpoint, and we'll delve into this a bit deeper on the next slide, KYB is crucial for financial institutions and other organizations to comply with various laws and regulations, including anti-money laundering, AML laws, and counter-terrorist financing or counter-financing of terrorism laws. Those two are interchangeable, and I'll probably flip between them during this talk, okay? Many countries require businesses to conduct KYB checks as part of their legal obligations to prevent illicit financial activities. Understanding the business you're dealing with helps in assessing and managing risks effectively. So KYB helps organizations identify and evaluate potential risks associated with their business clients, such as financial instability, reputational risk, or exposure to certain industries or regions with higher risk profiles. In terms of fraud prevention, proper KYB plays a hugely significant role, helping to prevent identity theft and business-related scams. By verifying the legitimacy of a business and the people behind that business, organizations can dramatically reduce the likelihood of falling victim to fraudulent transactions or business relationships. And obviously, engaging with unscrupulous or high-risk businesses can damage an organization's reputation, sometimes beyond repair. Stringent KYB checks can help to protect an organization's reputation by ensuring that it conducts business with legitimate and trustworthy entities. So on to the regulations, the sexy regulations. Almost all modern KYB regulations can be traced back to the Financial Action Task Force, the FATF. Now, the FATF is an intergovernmental organization that sets international standards for AML and CFT measures. It has developed its famous 40 recommendations, which provide a comprehensive framework for countries to establish effective AML, CFT regimes. These recommendations, really the beauty of them is that they're designed to be adaptable to different legal systems and financial sectors while providing a consistent and comprehensive framework for combating money laundering and terrorist financing globally. There are, at last count, 39 fully paid up FATF member states. Each is expected to implement the 40 recommendations as part of their national AML CFT regimes. Member states include all of the major economies, all the major markets. You've got US, UK, you've got EU in there collectively, and some member states individually, China, Brazil, and so on. These countries undergo periodic evaluations by the FATF to assess their compliance with the standards. In terms of official, well-known legislation, in the UK, we obviously have the UK money laundering regs. EU have their anti-money laundering directives. The US have the Bank Secrecy Act and the US Patriot Act. All of these lean heavily on the FATF recommendations. In APAC, we have the APG, or the Asia Pacific Group on Money Laundering. They are a FATF-style regional body that covers countries in the Asia Pacific region. It adopts the FATF recommendations verbatim, pretty much. And like the FATF, they conduct manual evaluations of member countries' compliance. Then we have international organizations such as the World Bank and the IMF. These will encourage member countries to adopt processes that align with the FATF recommendations as part of their broader efforts to promote financial stability and integrity globally. And there are also instances of countries themselves that enter into bilateral or multilateral agreements to combat money laundering and terrorist financing, often based on common adherence to FATF recommendations. One that springs to mind is you have Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. They all got together and formed the Baltic AML CFT initiative with the aim to prevent criminals exploiting regulatory differences across borders in the Baltic region. So yeah, there's lots and lots of regulations coming at you from all angles, really. But that covers the regulations internationally, at least at a relatively high level. To really get into the minutiae of this would be a masterclass of its own, and one I wouldn't be too keen on delivering, to be honest with you. I won't be volunteering for it, that's for sure. But there are other influential voices when it comes to KYB, okay, especially for the banks and the large financial institutions. You have the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, who issue guidelines and recommendations specifically tailored to the banking sector to combat money laundering and terrorist financing. There's also the hugely influential Wolfsburg Group, a cabal of major international banks that publishes AML CFT principles and guidelines that are widely followed by the global banking industry. And you know, the guidelines, standards, and principles from bodies like the two I just mentioned play a major role in shaping AML CFT regulations for the banking industry globally. It's worth noting as well that there's legislation outside of the world of AML pertaining to KYB. I'm thinking of things that have just come in, like the Inform Act and DAC 7, that's forcing online marketplaces to verify the people and businesses using their platforms to sell items and services be verified. It's less intensive than what we've become accustomed to, but there are some major fines and implications for anyone who falls foul of the legislation, which is quite broad and open to interpretation in its current form. Okay, and that takes us neatly on to some of the KYB pain points. Bear with me. So even though the regulations we've just gone through are designed to help companies verify the identity and business information of their corporate clients to prevent money laundering, fraud, and other financial crimes, they're not without their challenges. You know, they provide the kind of framework, but there are problems there. So while the specific pain points can vary depending on the industry, region, and the size of the company, Some universal frustrations for companies looking to comply with KYB regulations are listed on this slide here. The KYB process of the vast majority of companies that perform these checks are mostly manual, okay, mostly manual. 30% are still fully manual, which is bonkers. This leads to a frustrating, lengthy onboarding process, with some businesses waiting between 90 to 120 days to open corporate bank accounts. And that's not just a stat. You know, I've spoken with people who have genuinely experienced that. There are several factors and challenges inherent in verifying the identity and legitimacy of corporate entities to blame for it. Gathering accurate and up-to-date information about corporate entities can be challenging, especially for multinational companies with complex ownership structures. Often a business will be asked to provide specific documentation such as a certificate of incorporation or annual accounts, but there can be significant back and forth if the data within them doesn't match what's on public record. You know, such as if a company has changed its name since its incorporation, meaning the registered name no longer matches, or the accounts provided are an unaudited version, and it's the audited version that is available from, you know, whichever source they're using to obtain the data. As I'm sure you can imagine, verifying the authenticity of provided business documents and information can be time-consuming and resource-intensive, especially if you're talking internationally. You know, there's you need to be quite skilled and quite well trained to be able to perform that, which leads us quite nicely into data. This is a massive pain point in KYB, as the data required to adequately verify a business and the people behind it may be scattered across various sources and databases, making it incredibly difficult for businesses to obtain a comprehensive and accurate view of a potential customer's background. Incomplete or inaccurate data can lead to erroneous assessments of a business's risk profile. Businesses often change their details, such as, you know, their name, ownership structure, address, or its board can change, and it can be challenging to keep KYB data up to date, especially if doing so manually. As a consumer, for example, you know, if our details change, we tend to notify the banks and you know, other people straight away, as it can affect our day-to-day life quite dramatically. But there isn't that same sense of urgency when maintaining your company record at the registry, as you're only obliged to update your details annually. So the information may be accurate, but massively out of date at the same time. Many businesses rely on third-party data providers for KYB data. These providers may have varying levels of accuracy and coverage, and their data may not always align with the specific needs and risk criteria of the business. And there's often a lack of standardized formats for KYB data, making it difficult to compare and analyze information across different sources, which can obviously lead to inconsistencies in the assessment of risk, especially, you know, if you've got a team of people accessing data from different sources. You know, it's obviously going to cause inconsistencies. It's a massive risk there. Also, data provenance is something I personally talk a lot about. I mentioned the Wolfsburg Group on the previous slide. One of their recommendations was that it's best practice to verify a business against more than one data source. Now, anyone with a background in KYC, this will make complete sort of sense to you. You know, the classic 2+2 verification, where you confirm two pieces of identifiable data against two different data sources for an individual. The problem with applying that to KYB is almost all data providers will be using the local registry as their source of truth. So in the UK, that's Companies House. Now, imagine you were checking Companies House, a business credit report, and any other business data source, thinking you're getting triple confirmation, when in fact all you're doing is getting the same piece of data from the same source 3 times by a different method. I will always prioritize partnering with data providers where they call out the data sources the company has been found on, because the provenance of that data is of the utmost importance in KYB as far as I'm concerned. You know, if you can show you found this company on 3-4 different data sources, then you can be confident that it is a legitimate company. The frustrating thing is most providers are calling in data from multiple sources, but they don't necessarily highlight it. So if we take a credit report, for example, a lot of that information will come from the registry. But if there's payment data available or court filings or anything that isn't from the local registry, they should really be calling that out in a big way. They should be shouting it from the rooftops, as it potentially, helps validate that company's identity and goes a long way to supporting KYB. And while I'm on my soapbox here, and we're talking about registries, massive changes need to be made globally in the way companies are formed. If we take Companies House, for example, if you're in the UK, I think in the first half of 2019, something like 170,000 companies were established. And of those, 46% have now been struck off the register. Now, obviously, companies fail. We know that happens, but a large percentage of those would be fraudulent companies set up for nefarious means. And I know we have the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Bill passing through Parliament at the moment here in the UK, which will force directors to do an ID verification when they set up a company. But at the moment, I think it's estimated that 18% of companies on the British Register are kind of shell burner companies. That's nearly 1 in 5, and it's just not good enough, because if you and your data suppliers are using the registry as your source of truth, then that company is going to look legitimate from all the sources. So if one of these companies makes an application, you're going to verify it against your sources, and it's there, the details match. You're going to think, let's do business, when really they're probably going to disappear off into the sunset with whatever you ship to them and never be heard from again. The lack of international standardization is another big pain in the neck for people obliged to perform KYB checks and product managers like me looking to offer solutions, as different countries may have varying requirements and standards for collecting and verifying business information. This can lead to inconsistency in the data provided by businesses, making it challenging to establish a clear and accurate profile of a company's ownership and activities. The accessibility and transparency of business registries can differ wildly. In some countries, business registry information may be readily available online, while in others, it might only be accessible through government offices or with certain restrictions. If we take the public UBO registers, for example, there are more than 70 set up in the name of transparency globally, to much fanfare, but very few are publicly available for anyone to query. Many sit behind paywalls or are only accessible to residents of the country. And the requirements for disclosing ownership information can vary significantly. Some countries may have strict regulations that mandate the disclosure of UBOs or ultimate beneficial owners, whilst others may have less stringent rules, or in some cases none at all. Achieving full international standardization remains a complex and ongoing process due to differences in legal systems, in cultures, and business practices across countries. Initiatives such as the FATF and their recommendations, and the use of international identifiers like the LEI, the Legal Entity Identifier, aim to improve the consistency and effectiveness of KYB procedures on a global scale. But much of what I've ranted about here today will remain an issue for a long time to come, I fear, all the while making international KYB slower, more expensive, more difficult, and opening the door to fraud and money laundering risks. The final major pain point I have listed here is the sheer amount of resources that need to be employed for KYB. We went over the stats earlier, but the fact 30% of all businesses that perform KYB checks are still fully manual gives you some idea of the amount of time and resource that it takes to achieve an onboarding and then to monitor for any changes. If we look at the back of the back and forth that is gathering of data and documentation up front, this requires significant time and effort, especially for businesses operating in multiple jurisdictions. The data is then presumably entered into an internal system or put in somebody's in tray and verified manually, which of course leads to errors and inefficiencies as human operators may have may make mistakes or take longer to complete tasks. Ensuring the quality and consistency of data across various sources and jurisdictions can be challenging. Businesses change over time, names change, changes in ownership, changes at board level, new accounts being filed. So maintaining accurate and up-to-date records manually is incredibly resource intensive. And these manual processes, they're obviously notoriously difficult to maintain at scale. As businesses grow and onboard more corporate customers or partners, the KYB process needs to scale accordingly. Expanding resource to accommodate this growth can obviously strain budgets and operational capacity. Even if you've got money in the budget, where you're going to put these people, it's a massive issue. And then obviously, one country goes on to invade another, and there's waves of sanctions brought against them, which means any business or individuals on a company's book of business with any links to this newly sanctioned state, not mentioning no names, they need to be KYB'd all over again with fresh risk assessment and appropriate steps taken if they no longer fit within the company's risk profile. This, of course, will either cause a massive backlog in KYB or, or temps will need to be brought in at massive cost or resource brought in from another area of the business. And bearing in mind, KYB is a complicated process with many pitfalls. So employees responsible for KYB processing need training to keep up with changing regulations and technology tools and the sort of risk-based approach to the business. And investing in training programs consumes resources, both in terms of money and time. But having to react to major geopolitical events introduces massive risks unless all the resources that go into it are also trained properly on the company's processes and their attitude and approach to risk. Next slide. Trends in modern KYB. Just pause for a second. So I personally think there are a few reasons why KYB lags so far behind KYC. We've covered the issues around data availability and reliability when we went through the pain points on the previous slide. But I think a major issue is the fact that most of the companies that have tried to solve the KYB problem were first KYC companies. What I mean by that is KYC is very linear, very simple. KYC companies generally compete on response times and costs, and there's nothing else to it really. It's such an established commoditized process that it's all about shaving a few milliseconds off a response here or a few pennies off the price of a check. So for a CPO at one of these KYC companies to try to tackle KYB, it's going to be completely alien to them, and I've seen it myself. Because we've covered why the data is an issue, and there's so much of this data to process, and that the response times are painfully slow compared to KYC. So it's completely foreign to them as a business model. If we think about KYC, I as a consumer, I know my name, my address, I know my date of birth. I probably have my identification in my pocket all the time. So for me to perform a KYC check is incredibly simple. But for KYB, we've gone over why that is completely different, and you don't get some simple decision at the end. And there's investigation. You might need to dig into the corporate hierarchy and work through the ownership structure to find out who ultimately owns the company. KYC is also high volume and low cost. KYB is low volume, high cost. It's the opposite. It's a completely different business. Even though on the face of it, they're pretty similar. So it's understandable why KYC companies were the first to try it, but it's also understandable why they struggle to solve the KYB problem. Okay, but what we're seeing now is a wave of startups that have hit the market, like CAF, who are dedicated to solving the KYB problem and introducing automation and efficiency savings wherever we can. I'm not going to reel off the names because they're competitors, obviously, but they're out there. And the refreshing thing is everyone is doing something a little bit different, which fits with with the varied range of use cases for KYB. No two companies seem to have the same approach to it, it seems. So it's good that there's lots of different companies springing up to try and tackle it in their own way. Here at CAF, for example, we are working on building a global KYB onboarding solution that takes a lot of the manual effort out of KYB. So what we do is we allow our users to build onboarding flows where they can request documentation up front, set rules for automated decisioning, and have KYC check done on directors, shareholders, UBOs, all within the same flow. You'll never remove manual intervention completely, of course, but it's our job to keep chipping away at it and introducing automation where we can. In KYC, we're starting to see the adoption of blockchain and distributed ledger technology. At CAF, we have a product called AllID, which utilizes these technologies for consumers. And, it's been on my radar for a while to try to find a way to leverage it for KYB. But again, it's a difficult one for a number of reasons. Primarily, I think when you're talking about obviously rolling out the model for users en masse, it's much easier with consumers because of the frequency with which consumers carry out actions. With business, it's more piecemeal. It's not that often. So yeah, it's difficult to really find the sweet spot for KYB with DLT and blockchain, and a way in which you can roll it out and have it adopted effectively. I have to believe it's 100% possible, but it's tricky. The same with AI and machine learning. We're obviously seeing it being used more and more in our everyday lives, in our professional lives. We're all sort of using some form of AI or machine learning. But in the same way that, it's much easier to train and build models on consumer purely because there's always data coming in from consumers. With businesses, again, it's harder because the events are a lot less frequent. So, we can employ AI and ML to start detecting potential fraud and calling it out early, but it will inevitably move at a much slower pace than it does for consumers. And we talked about regulations earlier, and I spoke about the different regulations coming in from for the marketplaces. So yeah, obviously AML, CFT used to be large banks, financial institutions, and the like. And these guys, they obviously had the processes that have been around for a very long time. Definitely predated KYB legislation. They had ways of verifying the businesses that they were on board in. And as the legislation rolled out, they've probably bolted bits on and added stuff here and there and additional manual checks. But, we're living in the age of the startups and the fintechs and the marketplaces and the challenger banks. And all of these companies have a completely different attitude to tech, and they have completely different expectations when it comes to onboarding. And they really drive companies like CAF and our competitors to build the solutions we're building. So the regulations are shifting to keep up, and there are companies like ourselves that are trying to react to that and build a product that really sort of helps solve the problems, or at least some of the problems that the companies have in onboarding and monitoring merchants. So onto solutions and best practices. So yeah, as I think we've covered in this session, or at least I've tried to convey, in the realm of risk management and regulatory compliance, there's a dynamic sort of landscape that's replete with challenges and opportunities. And while it's important to acknowledge that I am not a certified MLRO, I'm not a money laundering reporting officer, and therefore cannot dispense formal advice on constructing a robust risk-based approach or regulatory compliance strategy. I can certainly try to shed light on the significance of harnessing technology and embracing simplicity in these endeavors. Efficiency and effectiveness, they sort of converge in streamlining the KYB process. It's a practice that warrants regular scrutiny. Organizations should meticulously evaluate what aspects of their KYB procedures are yielding value and what facets are redundant. I think dispensing with superfluous steps that do not contribute to building a comprehensive risk profile of your merchants or companies looking to onboard is incredibly sound advice. Technological innovations play a pivotal role here, and companies such as CAF are at the forefront, offering solutions designed to facilitate frictionless onboarding. Our innovation encompasses a user-friendly drag-and-drop onboarding journey builder, which obviously empowers organizations to completely customize their KYB process, eliminating the need for manual company identification, address verification, or document retrieval. Moreover, our platform enables the seamless capture of essential information, including who are the UBOs, who are the directors. UBOs and directors themselves can undertake ID verification within the flow, simplifying the process even further. The system will effortlessly process all that data and return automated decisioning, either in the platform or via our dedicated API. We're also focusing on team collaboration and escalation protocols, which are obviously essential components of KYB compliance, as in essence it's a team sport. Vigilance is always good and remains paramount in the ever-evolving landscape of regulatory compliance. Businesses must not only maintain a well-documented and comprehensible risk-based approach, but also prioritize ongoing staff training. You can't stress that enough. Consistency in onboarding practices and a harmonized attitude towards risk are foundational. Inevitably, as the business environment shifts, so the regulations, and staying attuned to these alterations along with regular reassessment of your risk profile is a must if you are to prosper. So yeah, in essence, KYB compliance is a continuous journey requiring adaptability and vigilance. By closely monitoring your book of business and aligning your risk strategy with your results, and always remaining responsive to evolving regulations, you can navigate these complexities effectively and safeguard your organization's interests. So that's me done. Before we conclude, I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of you for joining me today in this exploration of KYB challenges and trends. As we wrap up, I encourage you to continue immersing yourself in the wealth of knowledge and insights offered by CAF's Great Identity Debate. There are many more masterclasses and panel discussions for you to check out, covering a wide range of topics related to identity, compliance, and innovation. This event really is a unique opportunity to connect with experts, exchange ideas, and stay at the forefront of industry developments. So please explore the other sessions, engage in discussions, keep the conversation going, and hopefully together we can navigate the ever-evolving landscape of identity and compliance. So yeah, thank you once again, and hopefully our paths cross in the future. Have a great day.